The Midwife's Apprentice, chapters 8 and 9. The Twins. There being few babies born that September, Alice and the midwife spent their days making soap and brewing cider and wine. The first occupation stank up the air for miles around, what, with goose grease and mutton fat boiling away in the kettle, so that Roger Mustard in the manor fields and the miller at his wheel near the river sniffed the air and said, "Someone be making soap today." The second task would lay perfume on the air and gladden noses near and far. Alice was greatly relieved when enough soap was made to wash all the linen in England and brewing could begin. First, they cooked parsnips with sugar and spices and yeast and poured this into casks, where the fermenting mixture sang loud and sweet as it turned into wine. And the same they did with turnips. Then Alice, with baskets tied to each end of a pole, walked with the cat to the abbey gardens to gather fallen fruit. There, lying on the ground as if scattered by God just for Alice, were apples, red and yellow, large and small, sweet and tart, firm and juicy. She tried a few, but unable to say whether she liked best the crisp, white-fleshed cackagees, the small, sour foxwhelps, or the mellow, sweet rusticoats and ruby stripes. She tried a few more. The cat, not finding that apples were good to eat, batted the small ones across the yard, imagining they had ears and tails and other parts that made things worth chasing. Returning to the village late in the day, with her baskets and belly full of apples, Alice cut through the manor field near where the villagers had dug a pit for the quarrying of gravel. From inside the pit came the cries of some fearsome thing, a beast or a witch or a demon, so she crossed herself and hurried her steps. The demon was calling, "Come here to me, here to me." Alice ran faster, then stopped. The demon sounded mighty like Will, the boy with red hair who used to torment her and now did not so much. "Are you a demon or a red-headed lout?" she called. "Alice, be that you?" came the response from the pit. Cautiously, she crept to the edge and looked over. It was Red-Headed Lout, and with him his cow. "Alice, you must help me. Tansy has fallen into the pit, and I cannot get her to climb out, for she is about to have her calf and will not move. Come and help me." "I am no midwife for cows, Will Russet," she called. "She needs your help, Alice, and so do I." "Indeed, I am no midwife at all, Will Russet, and I do not know what to do." "Come over here and I will tell you. This is Tansy's first calf, but not mine." At that, Tansy called out, low and mournful, and full of pain and fright. Alice could not bear to leave her like that, so she put down her baskets of apples and slid into the pit. Will grinned at her. "Good for you, Alice. Here, hold her head. Keep her quiet. Sing something soft." "I do not know any singing, Will Russet." "Croon a song without words, then. Just make sweet noises." So Alice did, although none would have called them sweet, but she and the boy and the cow, and perhaps the cat, who lay above where Alice had left him, carefully licking the soft pink pads of his feet. "Hold her, Alice. Rub her head and belly. If we can but calm her, God will tell her and the calf what to do." Alice sang and rubbed, calling the cow sweetheart and good old girl, as she had heard Will do, and the boy pushed and pulled and worked as hard as the cow. Several times they near gave up, but Alice always found one more song or one more rub inside her, and Will loved Tansy like she was his baby and not his cow. And so the tired pair kept on. Finally, as day darkened into evening, there came the feet of a calf. Then more feet, and more. "Twins, Alice!" cried Will. "You have brought me great luck, for Tansy be having twins." So she was, and soon two slippery, shiny, brand new calves were lying in the dirt of the pit, and Tansy was licking and nuzzling them gently. Once Alice and Will took the calves upon their shoulders and scrambled from the pit, so too did Tansy, not willing to stay alone in that hard, dark, and calfless place. Like a holy procession, they returned to the village, the boy and the girl, and the newborn twins, and the cow and the cat. Will, so happy with twice the bounty he expected from Tansy, made sure to tell everyone of his luck and of the great help Alice had been to him, and Alice felt her skin prickling with delight, although she got in a muck of trouble for being so long about apple gathering and then losing the baskets as well as the fruit. For in the excitement of the twin calves, they were forgotten and left behind and never seen again. As September turned to October and October to November, through all these days, Alice grew in knowledge and skills. The midwife, busy with her own importance, did not notice. Alice, grown accustomed to herself, did not notice, but the villagers noticed, and as October turned to November and the ghosts walked on All Hallows Eve, they began to ask how and why and what can I? Sometimes, for her help or advice, someone would pay her a ribbon or an egg, or a loaf of cheese or bread, which she always gave to the midwife, as if Alice herself were just the midwife's hand or arm, doing the work and receiving the pay, but taking no credit for the task. One morning, as they sat under the old oak tree eating their breakfast bread, Alice told the cat again about the birth of Tansy's twins. All shiny they were, and sticky to touch. I did not even know them, but I loved them so much. This sounded to her like a song, so she made singing sounds as she had the day in the gravel pit, and then sang her words to the tune, All shiny they were, and sticky to touch. I did not even know them, but I loved them so much. And so it was that Alice learned about singing and making songs. Her song brightened the cold gray day so that a cowbird thought it was spring and began to sing in the old oak tree. Chapter 9. The Bailiff's Wife's Baby. A good nut year means a good baby year, the midwife said as she sent Alice and her nutting basket to the woods to see what kind of year it would be. All day, Alice shook the young trees, climbed into the old ones, and gathered the hard shelled bounty that fell. Hazelnuts, walnuts, chestnuts, almonds mounded in her basket, and stirred her hunger with thoughts of hot roasted nuts on cold winter nights. That was the limit of her imaginings, for never had she heard of almond cream, pickled walnuts, or eels in chestnut sauce, such as they ate in the manor or the homes of rich merchants in London and York. Coming back from the woods, she saw the boys teasing the cat. She took a handful of nuts, the biggest and the hardest and the heaviest in her basket, and heaved them at the boys. Touch that cat again, she shouted, and I will unstop this bottle of rat's blood and viper's flesh and summon the devil, who will change you into women, and henceforth each of you will giggle like a woman and wear dresses like a woman and give birth like a woman. She was too startled by her outburst to be afraid. The boys were too startled by her outburst to move, and so Purr the cat escaped, and Alice reached the midwife's cottage unharmed. And until they were quite old, the boys in the dark of night sometimes were afraid that the midwife's bottle actually had the power to make them into women. It was fortunate that the boys never tested Alice's magic, for the bottle she took so fiercely or shook so fiercely at them was naught but blackberry cordial she was to deliver to old Anna on her way home from nutting in the woods. And although it would have made the boys purple and sticky, no harm would have befallen them, and never would they have been able to give birth like a woman. That night, Joan the bailiff's wife sent for the midwife. Alice lighted Jane's way through the gloomy night with a rushlight that hissed and sputtered in the mist. The midwife chased Joan's husband, her young son, 2 pigs, and a pigeon out of the cottage, bade Alice wait for her in the yard, and slammed the cottage door. Alice dozed there in the wet through the long hours of the night. Shortly after dawn, when the sky turned not rosy and welcoming as it does in summer, but merely a lighter shade of gray, the midwife kicked her awake. Up, Beetle, and to the cottage for cowslip, mugwort, and pepper. By the 14 holy helpers, Joan will have to sneeze this baby out. When Alice returned, the midwife was waiting in the yard, her bottles and herbs and linen neatly packed in the basket beside her. Has Joan then sneezed her baby out already? Alice asked. Ha! Responded the midwife. This child looks never to come out. You go in and wipe Joan's face, and I will be back as soon as I can. Lady Agnes at the manor has started her labor and wishes me to attend her. They will pay me in silver, and the bailiff in chickens and beans. God, and the baby's willing, I will have it all. Alice began to cry. I do not know what to do, Mistress Jane. Do not leave me. Do not leave her. I do not know what to do. Alice was silenced with a hard slap. Do nothing, you lack-wit fool, the midwife spat. She will never deliver that baby. It will die unborn, and I will take it dead from her when I return. Let her labor while I see to the Lady Agnes. I will come back, do what must be done, and collect both fees. Alice snuffed into her sleeve, leaving her nose dirty and red and no drier than it was. Do nothing, repeated the midwife. In her state, Joan will not even remember that I left. Do nothing and say nothing. And off the midwife ran, up to the manor where the warm fires blazed, and the laboring mother was soothed with wine and syrups and kind words. Alice turned back to the dark, cold, nearly empty cottage, took a deep breath, and went in. She couldn't see the figure on the bed at first for all the smoke, and then realized that the writhing mound was Joan, the bailiff's proud wife, who washed her linen each week and never let herself be seen without shoes, even in summer. And there she was, a moaning, mewling sound on a straw bed. Alice covered her mouth and her eyes and turned to go. She could tell the midwife that she had waited with Joan, who was to know if she sat on the stoop until she heard the crinkle of the midwife's starched wimple. Let me die, by the bones of St. Mildred, let me die, or help me die. This moaning, mewling mound spoke not, as Alice expected, frantically or madly, but calmly and reasonably, asking for death. To Alice, it sounded all the more frightening and strange, as if a goose had spoken, or an egg, or the dung heap in the yard. Beetle, is that you? Joan asked. Where's the midwife? Out but to relieve herself, mistress. She will be back soon, and then your baby will be born. Don't sham me, Beetle. I know this babe is stuck and will never be born, and we will both die soon. And why not now? Surely the midwife has something in her basket to help us alone. Shh, mistress. 'Tis but pain and fright make you speak so, or else you'll never think of sending yourself to hell and the baby with you. Hell indeed, Beetle, and no worse than this suffering. Suddenly, the proud, reasonable Joan became again the moaning, mewling mound. Then, as the hot pains invaded her body, she shouted and thrashed and flailed, shrieking and kicking. Alice betook herself to the cottage door, ready to run from this horror, but the memory of the proud, frightened Joan of a moment ago kept her inside, and she asked herself, what would the midwife do were she here? What had Alice seen her do from cottage windows all this year when the babe would not come, and the mother looked to scream and thrash herself to death? What had Will done in that gravel pit to help Tansy with the calves who would not be born? Alice took another deep breath and returned to Joan's side. She gave her mugwort and warm ale to drink and spoke soothingly, calling her sweetheart and good old girl. She warmed oil over the fire and rubbed her head and belly as she had the cows. She did not know the spells or the magic, so she gave Joan all she had of care and courtesy and hard work. So it was that in the middle of the night, when the monks were rising from their beds for midnight prayers, and in the towns revelers were returning home full of beer and wine, and at the manor the midwife was delivering Lady Agnes of her first son, so it was that a calmer, more arrested Joan, with the kind attention of the midwife's apprentice, brought forth a daughter, feet first, but perfectly formed, whom she called Alice Little. Alice had washed Alice Little and wrapped her in clean linen and laid her in her father's arm before Jane the midwife bustled up the path and into the cottage. Jane made some remarks, which no one believed, about having left for just an instant and stuck her hand out for a fee. The bailiff said, We have no need of you, Jane. Your helper has taken care of us with her two strong hands and her good common sense. At that, Alice felt so much pride and satisfaction that she had to let them out somehow, and so she smiled, which felt so good that she thought she might do it again. Facing the midwife's jealous anger, she went back to their cottage, ate some cold soup and hard bread, lay down on her straw mat by the fire, and had a dream about her mother, which, upon waking, she could not remember.